My name is Sarah and welcome back to my channel. Today I am back to discuss some of my auto-buy authors. So yeah, by that I mean authors that if I saw they were releasing a new book, I would automatically go out and buy it. When I say automatically go out and buy it, I don't really buy very many new books, but you know what I mean. Like, I would be interested to read it, I would reserve it from the library, I really needing to know too much about it. And I thought there were going to be a lot of authors on this list, but then when I started actually thinking about what that means, I discovered that there are not that many. I think there are a couple of reasons for that. Firstly, I'm not including books that are part of a series because that's a little bit different. That's not like a new exciting book that an author's brought out. That's just a continuation of something that you've already started reading. So I'm not including like second, third books in series. Also, well, obviously the author needs to still be alive, so it's not really just these are my favourite authors, it's authors that are still bringing out books. I feel like I need to have read more than one of their books because otherwise it's just sort of you've read and liked one of their books and you're interested to see what they write next. But I'm more talking about the authors that you are pretty sure that even if you don't love their book, you're going to get something out of it because you've read multiple of their books. But I don't feel like you need to have read everything on their back catalogue. Like, there are some authors that I've read enough of to know that I want to read what they write next, but I'm not sure I want to go back and read all of their really old stuff because it was probably not going to be as good quality. Another thing that was quite interesting when I was thinking about auto-buy authors is that I don't really think that you need to have loved all of their books to automatically want to go out and buy whatever they write next. There are some authors on this list that I have actually disliked some of their books, but there's still something about them that makes me want to read what they write next. And sometimes it's because each of their books is so different that you don't know what you're going to get next, and that's interesting. And sometimes it's because you really like some of their themes that keep cropping up even if you don't actually love every book as a whole. There are some authors whose books I've really enjoyed, but that I thought that I would include in this list, and then I realised that they'd had a couple of books out recently that I've not picked up and not really been interested in, so then I feel like I can't include them because obviously I would not rush out to buy their book. For example, Zadie Smith is an author who I've read a couple of her books. In fact, I've read 3 or 4 of her books and I really enjoyed most of what I read, but when she brought out The Fraud, I was just not that interested in it, so I didn't pick it up, so I don't feel like I can include her. Yeah, there are a couple of other authors that I was like, oh yeah, I would read what they read next, and I was like, I'm like 3 books behind, so obviously I wouldn't. Okay, so let's start. The first author that I have in this list, and this is actually the reason why I decided to make this video, it's what got me thinking about it, is Olga Tokarczuk, because I recently read The Empusium by her, and I really enjoyed it, and it just made me appreciate how much I like her as a writer. I hadn't really felt that way, interestingly, after having read 2 of her books. Like, I enjoyed both of them, but reading this third one made me think I really want to read everything she brings out, because they're quite different. So The Empusium was a historical fiction set at a like health resort where people are recovering from tuberculosis, and it's sort of got a lot of dark horror-y elements to it, and I just really enjoyed it. I thought what she was saying about gender and misogyny and just really interesting and really well done. And I sort of felt similarly about Drive Your Plow Over the Bones of the Dead, which I read a few years ago now, and I really enjoyed this one as well. This is sort of like a murder mystery, which I don't really enjoy, but the main character is really quirky. It's sort of like a literary mystery where the main point of the book is not really trying to figure out who's committed these crimes. It's just like a small town story with this wacky main character. And then I also read Flights. I think this was the first one I read, and this is I think why I didn't love this one as much. This is more sort of short stories and they're a bit random, but they do sort of come together, not as a novel, but as like a collection with little interlinking elements between them. And so I did like this, but I didn't like love every story. There's a story about, is it Mozart? No, Chopin's heart traveling from Paris to Warsaw. That was a bit random. But yeah, I just think that everything she brings out is quite different, and I I think there are a couple of older books that I've not read that I probably won't go out of my way to pick up, but I definitely will read, I think, whatever she writes next without needing to know anything about it. Next on my list is an author that I've talked quite a lot about in this channel, and that's Alvaro Enrigue, because I read his book Sudden Death when it came out 7 years ago, I want to say. I just randomly picked it up, and it's about a tennis match between Caravaggio and Hernan Cortes, and I just really love this book. It's like a really quirky historical fiction, and when I saw that he had a new book coming out this year called Your Dreams of Empires, without needing to know anything about it, I bought it. And I actually bought this brand new, which I very rarely buy brand new like hardback books, so I was just really excited about it and I really enjoyed it. And I think this is almost the opposite of what I was saying about sometimes authors' books are all very different. Like, these books are both quite similar in terms of the subject matter, but it's subject matter that I don't really see explored by other authors. So this book is a historical fiction as well about Hernan Cortes, his first meeting with the Emperor Moctezuma. This is just a really quirky historical fiction as well. The books are very similar, but I just really like what he's doing with this period of historical fiction and the way he sort of brings these narratives together that are quite unusual. And so I will definitely read whatever he brings out next. If it's about the same subject matter or something completely different, I think I would read it regardless. An author whose books I've actually read all of is Eleanor Catton, and my favourite book by her is The Luminaries, and this is the book I read first. And I really love this book. This won the Booker Prize back in, I want to say 2013. And this is a historical fiction set in New Zealand during the gold rush, and we follow, I think, 12 different characters, and there's sort of a mystery at its element, but it's very literary in the way it's written. And she's doing a lot with horoscopes, and it's just very interesting. And so I completely fell in love with this book, and I bought her first novel, which was The Rehearsal, and it took me so long to get to this because I really don't like this cover. And this is a really quirky little book that has sort of two different storylines. I only read it earlier this year, but it's about this, it's quite meta, it's about this group of students that are creating a play to perform, and at the same time we're following a character who exists in this world who is also telling us this story as if it's real life, and they've got two different timelines. You're not sure how they intersect. It's really interesting. I think in both of these books she plays with time in a really interesting way, and she had a book out last year called Birnam that I also read, and I didn't love it as much. It's a sort of eco thriller, and I do really like her writing style, but I found this a bit more, I don't want to say generic because that's not fair, but it's more of a straightforward storyline, and I didn't think it was doing anything as interesting as our other two books. But all of these books are completely different subject matter, and I just think that the way she writes is really interesting, and I would definitely read whatever she writes next, because yeah, she seems to be just doing whatever she feels like, and I really appreciate that. Author who's non-fiction, I would basically read anything they write, not necessarily her fiction, but yeah, her non-fiction is Olivia Lang. I first read Funny Weather, Art in an Emergency, and this is sort of essays about artists, interviews with artists and writers, and just sort of musings on art. And I think it's actually taken from articles that, yeah, it brings together a career's worth of her writing about art and culture. So this is sort of just a bind up of lots of different articles and essays that she's written throughout her career. And I just really liked the way she spoke about art. She introduced me to a lot of artists that I hadn't heard of, and how they interlink. I think what she does really well is I get a larger sense of the sort of modern art world when she writes about these artists and what they've all got in common and how they knew each other, blah blah blah. So I really, really liked this, and then I read quite quickly afterwards Everybody, and really loved it as well. It's sort of similar, but this is a book that's written like to be a book, but it is also non-fiction about art and freedom. And then a book that came out this year that I reserved from the library without knowing really what it was about is The Garden Against Time by Olivia Lang, obviously. This is about Old garden in Suffolk that Olivia Lang began to restore in 2020, and then again she is sort of drawing on different gardens within art and literature. So she's talking about Milton's Paradise Lost. I think she talks about Derek Jarman and his garden, and yeah, I'm going to read this next, I think, because yeah, I like her non-fiction and I will read anything she brings out without needing to know too much about it. And that's kind of because she tends to write about artists and culture in a way that I find interesting, so I think that whatever she writes I will enjoy. I'm not so interested in her fiction. I know that she has written maybe a couple of novels. I might like them, but I'm not in a huge rush to pick them up. If you watched my last video of my unhaul of books, you may be surprised to see this author in this video because I did unhaul one of her books, and that's Hanya Yanagihara. I unhauled To Paradise, and again, this is a case of I've not really loved all/any of Hanya Yanagihara's works, but there's something about her as a writer that makes me want to keep coming back. So I first read A Little Life maybe 6 or 7 years ago now, and that book really broke me because at that time I hadn't really heard anyone review it. I hadn't really been watching BookTube much at that point, and I just sort of, I think I heard someone talking about it on YouTube, but without any context, and I was on holiday and I needed a book to read on my Kindle, and I just downloaded it. I didn't even realise how long it was, and I kept thinking, wow, this book is really long, and yeah, it destroyed me because I had no idea it was meant to be a sad book or anything. There's a lot of differing opinions on A Little Life. Some people really love it, some people think it's a bit problematic, and I can understand both points of view, but I think for a book to make you have such a strong reaction shows that there's obviously something very compelling about it. You've obviously connected to the characters. Like, I can read books where terrible things happen, but I don't care because I'm not invested. So I was definitely very, very invested in that book. And then I read The People in the Trees, and I had heard really good things about this, and this is very different. This is about a young doctor that embarks on an expedition to a remote Micronesian island. And I really loved her writing in this. It's very detailed, and just, it's a sort of story that, again, I was very, very immersed in it. I didn't fully fall in love with this book, and there are some elements, again, that are not even problematic, but I was just like not that interested in some of the sort of questions as to whether this man is a good person or bad person. Like, I didn't really care, but I enjoyed the process and hearing about his expedition to Micronesia. And then with To Paradise, it was completely different again, and I'm not sure I loved it, but again, it was an experience and I was quite invested in it at the time. So I think that she's written 3 completely different books, and I really like her writing style, but there's just been something about all of the books that I've not completely fallen in love with. But I do think that I will continue to read whatever she brings out because, yeah, there's something about her that I obviously am drawn to. An author who, again, I'm more drawn to her non-fiction, but I have read and really enjoyed both her fiction and her non-fiction, and I will definitely read whatever she publishes next, is Siri Hustvedt. I first read What I Loved, which is a novel by her. Siri Hustvedt she's an interesting author because she, I think first and foremost, was an author, but she has since trained in psychology and a lot of different sciences, and her non-fiction really focuses on science, neuroscience and psychology specifically, and that's definitely evident in her fiction as well. So a very vivid memory of this book and like the setting it has in my head, but I can't actually remember the plot to summarize it. But and I think that's also because I wouldn't want to give too much away, because I remember getting like a third of the way through this and being like, I didn't realise this was what this book was about, and when I look at it in the back there's no mention of the thing that happens, so I'm like going to keep this very vague. But this is a book set in New York about a professor and his family and what happens there, and it's a lot about the art scene in New York, and it was excellent. Like, this is one of my, I'd say this has got to be up there with one of my favourite books. Like, I just really, really loved it. And so then I picked up The Blazing World, and I didn't love this one as much. This is also about an artist in New York, and looking back on her life as she's dying, and again, it had lots of interesting references to art and literature, and I found it really interesting, but I didn't love it as much. But since then I have read 2 or 3 of her non-fiction books and really loved them. So I first read Living, Thinking, Looking, and this is her essays about covering a wide range of subjects from the nature of desire to false memories and the paintings of Goya she draws in her own life and in the insights provided by both the arts and sciences to deepen our understanding of what it means to be human. So yeah, these essays are just about so many different things, and everything she writes about I find fascinating. So I really loved this. And then I also read Mothers, Fathers and Others. That might not be right. I'll put a picture up. Which is I think her most recent collection of essays that, again, I really loved. Sort of similar type mixture of things, which I just find really, really interesting. So I will definitely read whatever she writes non-fiction next. I think fiction I would need to check and see if it's something I'm interested in, because I also read Memories of the Future, which was a novel by her that was an older novel, and I didn't love it as much, so I would definitely check what the fiction's about. But non-fiction, I think I would just read anything she writes, because I just find her such a fascinating person. Into the last two, Catton's an author that I don't really have any interest in reading the rest of his back catalogue, but I will definitely read whatever he writes next, and that's Paul Beatty. So I read The Sellout maybe 4 or 5 years ago now, and I really, really loved this book. So this again won the Booker Prize, and it's a satire about a black man in America that owns a slave, and it really is a commentary on race and class in the States. And that's why I'm not so interested in reading his back catalogue, because I then went on and read The White Boy Shuffle. But this was written in the 90s, and I think a lot of the satire is definitely always very of its time, and as soon as you start reading older stuff, you miss the cultural references unless you can remember a lot from that time, and I don't remember anything from the 90s, so I didn't really get as much out of this. But I think whatever he writes next, because he was originally a poet, so his writing is really lyrical and beautiful as well, but I think whatever he writes next will be very, I will definitely be interested in, because it's going to be, even if it's not a satire, it's still going to be very of its time, very current, and I think I'll find it fascinating. But yeah, I'm probably not going to go back and read all of his older books. And then lastly, an author who I've loved some of his books, and then some of his books less so, but I'm still fascinated by everything he writes, is Kazuhiguro. I first read Remains of the Day when I was in high school. This was our book that we read before our hires, which are the same as A levels if you're English. This is a book about a butler who's sort of reflecting back on his life, and maybe he's devoted his life a little bit too much to his career and missed out on other things. And that's sort of a theme throughout Ishiguro's work. He definitely looks into nostalgia and memory a lot, but that's kind of the not the only theme, but one of the only themes running through them, because he's written so many different books. So I've read An Artist of the Floating World, which is about an old man sort of reflecting on his life in Japan who's a painter. I've read A Pale View of Hills, which is about a mother who's reflecting on her daughter's life. I've read The Buried Giant, which I didn't like as much. It's a very light fantasy book set during the time of King Arthur, and about this sort of mist that descends and people start to lose their minds, and again it's about sort of memory and identity. I read When We Were Orphans, which is set in Shanghai, which is about this man going back to try and find out what happened to his parents, who are supposedly died, but there's sort of no trace of them, and again it's dealing with his childhood memories. And read The Unconsoled, which is a very dream-like novel that follows someone who, I think he's a pianist, and he's sort of trying to navigate this world, and again it's all about his memories. And then more recently I read Clara and the Sun, which is about AI and also what makes us human. It's also sort of about the processing of memory, so this is definitely a theme in his books, but I think he just writes in a really interesting way. His language style is very pared back, but he's able to write so many different types of books with similar themes. I just find really interesting. So he is an author that I will definitely read whatever he writes next. The one book that I've not read, which is probably his most famous book, is Never Let Me Go, because I went to see that at the cinema when it came out, the one with Andrew Garfield, and it destroyed me, and I just don't think I can do it again in book format. so I might skip that one, but yeah, I'll definitely read whatever he writes next. He is a very popular author. I just think he's a really interesting writer. Yeah, those are all of the authors that I would rush out to buy a new book that came out. Let me know if you have any authors that are like that, and what your criteria for deciding like what makes an auto buy author, because as you can see from this list, there are a lot of authors that I would definitely buy their next books, but I maybe didn't actually like all of their books that much. So I think it's really interesting how that works, because there are some authors like Elena Ferrante who I really like most of her work, but I think it's almost, I don't want to say too samey because that's not fair, but there are a lot of really similar themes that makes me not, I wouldn't be desperate to go and specifically read her new book rather than read some of her older books that I've not got to yet, because I'm not sure that the new book is going to be doing something incredibly different or innovative. So yeah, anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I'll see you again soon.